So to continue on in our Juneteenth broadcast, I want to bring on a friend of mine, a guy who really doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Larry Sharpe was the Libertarian Party candidate for vice president in 2016, or the nominee, not the nominee, the candidate in 2016, and then 2018 candidate for governor in New York, securing ballot access. So far, they trying to change the law on us in 2018. And more than that, Larry is a guy who, when he speaks, he reaches people that need a specific message. I tell the story. 2017, Larry came up to speak at the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts, and my wife, as you can imagine, doesn't want to go to every single Libertarian event I go to, but she gives me 2 a year. She came to the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts convention, where Larry just laid it down, the truth. And afterwards, she's like, I think I'm a libertarian. And I was a little upset because obviously I had been living with her, or we'd been married for 17 years at that point. But it's a thing that Larry has. He has this ability to resonate with people that is unique. And one of the reasons why he's going to be an outstanding guest for us here on our Juneteenth broadcast. So welcome to the show, Larry Sharpe. Larry, thanks so much for being here.
Dan, so glad to see you. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. It's, it's important to me, I, as a guy who grew up in Galveston, to talk about Juneteenth, because I think still it's not a broadly understood or well-known holiday. And so just for the people who don't know, Juneteenth is celebrated as the day that slavery was officially ended. And the reason they call it Juneteenth is because in the old days, communication wasn't instant. I mean, millennials can't understand it, but nobody was able to make a Facebook post saying slavery is over. So the message took a while to travel. And there's, of course, stories of unreliable narrators. There are some people who were benefiting from slavery who never bothered to tell their slaves, oh, slavery is over, by the way. All these things that you would expect. And we celebrate Juneteenth as a day of liberation, something that's important to the Libertarian Party. And there's a lot of issues around that. And Larry, you wrote a piece about a libertarian plan for reparations, which I think is everybody should read it. They can find it at your site, I think sharpeway.com. And going there, let's talk first about what reparations means to different people, because I think that's an important first part of this topic.
Yeah, let me, if I could, thank you for that. Let me, if I could, kind of preface it with two different pieces, if I could.
Yeah.
The first piece is what we seem to have dealt with, or what seems to be happening right now in America. And that is the idea of the left usually saying racism is systemic and then blaming the individual. That doesn't work, right? It's either systemic or it's the individual, right? Systemic means that it doesn't matter who the individual is, the system creates the racist outcomes. If that's true, then it doesn't matter if the person's black or white or whatever they are, the system pushes them to that, right? The reason why you'll find very often people who shoot cops who attack or hurt or kill black people sometimes are also black or Hispanic or whatever, right? It isn't only white cops who do that. Right. So that's a type of systemic thing we're talking about, right? That's a system. So it doesn't make sense to me to go white guy bad. That doesn't make any sense because it's systemic.
Right. Right.
So that's piece one. But when we do that, and now the left goes, oh, see, you're bad. Now I've lost my allies. I want allies. If the system is bad, and I say it is, then I need allies to change the system. So why would I alienate people when I need them to change the system?
Right. And I just have to put on top of that, I think anybody who doesn't think that the current system is broken isn't paying attention, because the numbers are overwhelming. There are very different outcomes in the legal system based on your color. There are very different outcomes before you get to the legal system, whether or not you are stopped by a police officer in the first place, based on what you look like. And so I think that I hope that most of the United States is past the idea that there is not systemic racism, because clearly there is.
No. There's a huge chunk of America who does not believe it at all. Wow. And the reason why they won't hear it is because we say systemic, but then blame the individual. What I say, and there's certain phrases we use when it comes to systemic racism. we say things like white supremacy or white privilege. Now, why would I use those phrases? If you and I, Dan, are in we're PhDs and we're in some ivory tower having intellectual conversation, fine, let's use those phrases. Who cares? We know the definition, what that's supposed to be. We get it. No worries. We can have that conversation. But once you bring that into the mainstream, what does every white person think when they hear white supremacy? Oh, I'm a racist? What does every white person who's not wealthy hear when we say white privilege? Wait a minute, I'm not privileged. So we're just alienating people. Now, if you went to the average person, white person or not, and said, can we talk about the criminal justice system? I think there are some black disadvantages. 90% of Americans would go, yeah. 90% would.
Right.
But if you instead said, I think there's some white privilege, a bunch of Americans go, no, there's not. My brother was in jail. I was in jail. I got arrested for meth. They don't believe you. They don't hear you. The phrase itself is insanely dumb and not required. It makes no sense whatsoever. So we shouldn't be using those phrases. They are alienating phrases, right? So that's the first piece.
Yeah. And especially, that idea of, when there is a message in there, and, you taught me something here. I never thought about the idea that saying white privilege, as opposed to just privilege, is going to take some people and look at it and they're going to say, well, why are you calling me out for it? I mean, I think that there is a truth that, if you're white and you're in a car, you're less likely to get stopped, but that's a privilege. It's not your fault that you were white at that point in time.
So let me go back to that exact point. If we're going to say white privilege, if we're going to say that, which again, I'd rather say disadvantage, but fine, we're going to go there. Yeah. If there is some privilege given to white people, it is the system that gives the privilege.
Right.
The individual white person doesn't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm a white guy. Let me use my privilege today. No one does that. That's a fantasy. Nobody does that. Yeah. But if there is a system that does that, then again, let's stop blaming white people and let's instead fix the system. I go back to the same thing. So again, I wouldn't use white privilege or white supremacy. I wouldn't use those phrases. I think they're bad, divisive phrases. But if you want to use them, I can't stop you. At least think, okay, so it's the system that provides this supremacy or provides this privilege. So how about instead I stop saying, hey, white guy, don't be white. Or hey, white guy, you're bad for being white. Right. How about I might say, hey, white guy, you're getting some advantage or something because this system's broken. Can you please help me fix this system? The problem we have right now, particularly with the right has a different problem. I'm staying on the left for a little bit. I'll go to the right in a second. On the left side, you have people who are saying, well, if you say you're not racist, then that also means you're kind of racist because everybody's racist. This goes back to the next piece. When the average person hears the word racist or racism, they still think of a guy with a hood trying to kill a black guy or a guy with an armband trying to, put a Jewish person in a camp. They still see it. That's the connotative meaning of that. Right. So when you say that, of course, the average person goes, I'm not racist. Why would you say that? Stop doing that. So when you say that, they get mad. Now, who isn't mad when you call them a racist? An actual racist.
Exactly.
Yes. They're like, yeah, I'm in. Yeah. Yep. Hate those other people, whichever ones I'm racist against. I hate those people. So yeah.
I am defending my race.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So when you call someone racist and they say, I'm not racist, we get angry at them when we should be like, I'm glad this person is unhappy being called a racist. Maybe they think racism is bad. But we're now punishing them for that instead of going, good. Oh, good. Okay, you don't like being a racist. That's wonderful because you're not one. So I think that's another issue we're dealing with. That's the left. The right has the backlash problem. The right is so angry and feels so attacked and alienated that they have decided that there is no problem. They've decided there's no problem. There's no such thing as systematic racism. Nothing's racist. And they find answers and everything they can to deny that it even exists. And I don't blame the left for what they're doing. I don't blame the right for what they're doing. They're both wrong. Right. The reality of it is there is a systemic issue. It's not the individual. We should all band together to fix the system. And the reason why I talk about Juneteenth so often, and I talk about the systems, is every time you see huge racial disparity, huge racial aggression, violence, it is every single time government sponsored. Every time. It's not individual sponsored. The individual American actually doesn't care about race at all. The individual American gets up every day and goes, I got my own stuff to deal with. I'm going to go deal with my stuff. That's what the average American does. I want to go deal with my stuff. And then race comes in. Of course, but they don't care about it. How do I know it to be true? Again, Look at the laws in the South. They had to have segregation laws because they didn't have laws. We would have integrated.
Right. You know, it's one of my favorite examples, and people don't realize that Rosa Parks being on the back of the bus was actually the legal split that was required by the town of Montgomery.
That's correct.
You look, you know, where there's a lot of talk right now about Tulsa and Rosewood. In both of those cases, the government is heavily involved in what's going on.
Oh, hold on. Let me touch the Tulsa.
Yeah.
Look at those pictures of the black men walking.
Yeah.
What's next to them? U.S. Army soldiers.
Yep.
They are being walked away as prisoners. What people don't understand about Tulsa is the side is one or the other. Well, it's, you know, some black guy was raping women, so they had to take care of him, and that's got out of hand. That's side one. Other side is, well, white people are evil and got mad and decided they were jealous, so they burned down Tulsa. Let me tell you what actually happened over all of that, regardless of how that happened. The Black Wall Street was filled. It was 1920, 21, right? Filled with World War I veterans.
Yep.
Black World War I veterans who had fought in France.
Yep.
So they all were armed and knew how to fight. So what had to happen? No sheriff's going to walk into that. That sheriff would have been shot dead. There's no way that was going to happen. No individual guy's going to walk in there. He'd have been shot dead. Nope, not happened. What actually happened was the government created a bunch of deputies by giving them government-sponsored weapons and weapons from the army, and used army veterans, white army veterans, to go in there and disarm everyone.
Right.
Then the army came in and marched those men out. Then they could burn Wall Street. They couldn't burn Wall Street without it. So government had to sponsor it. The individual average white guy wasn't like, you know what I should do today? Let me go burn down Black Wall Street. That doesn't happen. That's never happened. It's always government sponsored.
And so putting that, I mean, I think there we've sort of set the table perfectly to talk about the idea that if you have this level of systemic racism, there has to be a level of systemic reparations.
Yes.
But go ahead. You go.
Let me walk down that reparations piece now.
Yep.
With almost all other reparations, there's been a proximity to the event. So the people who were paying the price, it was kind of, if not exactly, at least close to the people who did the deed or responsible. And that's been common in most cases, some exceptions, but in most cases, that's been true. The example I'll give is we talked before about Jewish reparations. The German government paid Jewish survivors for years. I think there may be still some survivors who are being paid, but I'm unsure. But the German government paid. Well, the German government started paying in the 40s. Well, yeah, they probably should have. It was those people who did it. So yes, they should pay. Makes total sense, right? And most people were okay with that. Made sense. Let's do it. So that happened. When it came to Americans, Black Americans, there was an actual plan to make that happen. The 40 acres and a mule. Maybe you've heard about that. Yep. What was supposed to happen in 1865, which was put forward, I think, by Sherman and or Grant. I've forgotten which one. I think it was Sherman who put it forward. It was the idea of, let's take the land of the wealthy landowners who own slaves. So people who benefit from slavery, they pay. Makes total sense. The poor white guy in the South who didn't own slaves doesn't pay that price. Makes sense. Like that idea. Take their land. They're the ones who did it. Perfect. And the army now literally has millions of mules it's using to pull the wounded, pull ammunition, pull supplies. When the war's over, we don't need them. Why don't we give these mules so that we don't have to either kill them or feed them, give them to the former slaves? We'll give them 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me.
Makes total sense. Love the idea. That would have been great. So, of course, former slaves heard this and started going back to the land and cutting it up and doing it. Then Lincoln gets shot. Then Andrew Johnson shows up and goes, oh, no, we're not doing that. So he sends the army in to forcibly remove the slaves.
Wow.
So government comes in, removes the slaves. And Johnson, by the way, gave the slave owners reparations for losing their slaves. Yes. Right. People say, well, why didn't they give other people? They did. Literally, the slave owners got reparations for losing their slaves because that was property in Andrew Johnson's mind. So they got reparations. The slaves didn't. So you might say, well, wow, that's terrible. It is. And they were forced to become sharecroppers or leave or died or were killed by the government, all those things. So now so reparations doesn't happen then. So now what do black people do? Well, let's try to survive on our own anyway. We're not segregation. Well, first, black people try to get into the government, right? They try to get in the government. That gets cut out. Now they can't vote. Now they're segregated. So what do? They create their own systems, right? So they create their Wall Streets. There were many Wall Streets throughout the country. They create their own. So they go, okay, we can do it ourselves. And then in each case, the government sees it, and then government-sponsored begins to burn and destroy them systematically.
Right.
So no reparations. And then when they try to get in the government, pushed out of government. And then when they try to build their own, gets destroyed. So now, after every war, the black soldiers who thought, I fought for this country, so I get something. After the Civil War, nope. Yep. After World War I, nope. Black Wall Streets, KKK is as powerful as it ever was after World War I, right? Yep. Again, got to shoot them down. After World War II, we think, okay, now they got to give it to us now. We fought in 3 wars. Come on. Now they're going to give us something, right? Yep. No, because now the government comes down and says all these mortgages, all these government-backed loans can be in all these neighborhoods except black. If you were Jewish, if you were Irish, if you were Italian, you could be in. They didn't like you guys either, but they would take some of you. And they literally had guidelines. It was 30%. It could be 30% of the neighborhood. It could be Jewish or Italian or Irish. So the Irish and Italians and Jews, they got their little area they could be in a little bit. We're okay with some of you. That's it. But black people, 0. Yep. So now again, we want our piece of the pie. We can't get it. We can't get our piece of the pie again. We're redlined out. We can't get mortgages, all these things. Yep. And then people say, well, okay, but you got civil rights. Well, we fought for civil rights then, right? So we get the Civil Rights Act. Okay, we get that. We went back to government because trying on our own didn't work. So we said, okay, we're going to try government. So we got the Civil Rights Act. Yeah, but wait a minute. But what does the Civil Rights Act give us? War on poverty, war on drugs.
Right.
War on poverty, war on drugs.
Victims. Yep.
Yes. So as we thought we were getting equal, now we get made victims. Even if we don't want to be victims, we get made victims.
Yep. And I just want to, you talked about redlining. People who aren't familiar with that, look it up. It's a separate show on itself, but it's an unbelievable part of systemic racism that people should be aware of. So look up redlining. That's your homework. Keep going.
And I want to be clear. People get mad and go, well, you're saying we're racist. No. Do I think the average broker said, ooh, I don't want to put a black family in this house? No, I think the average broker wanted to make money.
Right.
And probably would have put a black family in the house. But when literally the black family can't get a loan to get in the house, or if a black family goes into that neighborhood, all of them can't get loans because of government regulations and rules. You've just made the non-racist broker a racist because of the system. You've made them racist, and they weren't racist. They were just some guy or some gal trying to make money. And all of a sudden now they have to act in a racial manner. You keep doing that for decades and people start acting accordingly. Well, now the war on drugs comes. So the war on drugs now says, okay, we got to start, literally beating up black people. And for some reason, Nixon didn't like Puerto Ricans. I don't know why specifically, but Nixon did not like Puerto Ricans. I don't know why. Puerto Ricans are wonderful people. I love them, but whatever. That's his thing. That's his kink, whatever. He doesn't like Puerto Ricans. He didn't say like Mexicans or Hispanics. He was specific on Puerto Ricans for some reason. Anyway, so Nixon wants to beat up black people, Puerto Ricans, and the liberals, whoever he thought they were.
Right.
So war on drugs. War on drugs comes through, and the problem is you got to pay for it. You got to validate it.
Yep.
Well, how do you pay for it? How do you validate it? Well, grabbing people's stuff.
Yep.
How do you do that? Poor neighborhoods.
Asset forfeiture.
Asset forfeiture, poor neighborhoods. Yep. And what made it worse? Now you think, well, things are getting better because we've got, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on TV, and we've got Cosby before he was rapist. They got him on TV, right? We go, we're doing fine. Here comes Clinton, and now our President Joe Biden in Senate, crime bill. Yep. These are evil. We're going to put 100,000 cops into black neighborhoods. So let me ask you a question. People, this is the argument from the right. The right says, well, if they wouldn't get in trouble, they wouldn't be in front of cops. They wouldn't be getting arrested. That's an accurate statement. But if I put 100,000 cops into your neighborhood, then you would be accosted by cops because I put 100,000 cops in. Yet again, the government system puts 100,000 cops into black neighborhoods. Yeah. It wasn't like the cops wanted to go to black neighborhoods. They didn't, well, most cops obviously don't get up and go, you know what I did today? Beat up some black people. They don't do that. They don't care. That's their job. Well, if the government puts you in black neighborhoods, what are you going to do? You're going to hunt in black neighborhoods. Right. And then the government says, I'm only going to pay for those cops for 2 years. After that, fine. Most people don't know this. The federal government only paid for those cops for 2 years. After that, there was no more money. So what do you got to do? Civil asset forfeiture goes into overdrive.
Right. When a policeman has a
it.
financial incentive to confiscate property to maintain his job, his or her job, it's very much a, everybody can look at it. If you can't look at
literally,
it, it's a broken thing.
Literally systemic.
Yep, exactly.
But now people say, well, Larry, you don't get it. So your redlining thing doesn't work. Because your redlining thing, we ended that in like the 70s or something. And by the 80s, it was over. Well, that's theoretically accurate. However, when people and bankers and mortgage brokers are looking for people with good credit, they're looking for good credit. Of course they are. So what happens? Well, can black families have good credit? Not a history, because they were denied
before. Yep.
For decades. So now we're all climbing up a ladder and we're going, well, now I've removed the handcuffs. Yeah, but I'm at the bottom of the ladder still. You guys are at the halfway point.
Right.
So even if we go up the same, I'm still behind you. That's a problem there, right? I got to get there. Now add that plus the war on drugs. What does the war on drugs do? It removes the father from the home. What does the war on poverty do? It increases and helps the father not being home. It makes sense for the woman to not be working and the father not be at home.
Right.
Yet again, a system.
Right.
That's what began to happen.
And just to be clear for the people who may not know that, part of the war on poverty was that if there was not a father in the household, a woman would get more money from the government.
Yep.
And so in many cases, and very much racially targeted, in many cases, that meant that black families chose to not have a father in the household so that there would be more money. It's, it was a very deliberate attack.
Absolutely. So am I calling the average banker or mortgage broker racist? Again, no, I'm not calling the individual American a racist. I'm calling the system. Did the banker actually care who they gave the money to? No. All the banker did was look at who had the best credit, the best chance for them to make money. That person consistently was a non-black person because that person didn't have a credit history.
Right.
That's the reason. So it wasn't that it was a racist banker. He just looked at the numbers and said, there's the numbers. I'm going to pick who I'm going to pick with the numbers. That's systemic. That's what I mean.
And so here now we go. Your argument is flawless. There has been systemic racism. And in many ways, we are the first generation to really talk about doing something about it.
Yes.
And so there is, but you also point out that you can't blame the individuals. It has to be a thing with the system. So how do we have a system of reparations of trying to right the wrongs that were done in the past that doesn't hurt the people who are currently? I'm laying it out for you. What do you got for me?
The biggest issue that the black community deals with in general, there are many of them, but here are two big issues. One, generational wealth, and two, an ownership mindset. Those two things are critical for the black population to grow. Killer Mike said it. He was like, he did one of his shows where he was talking about, trying to survive in a black only environment, right? Trying purposely to only go to black owned businesses in Atlanta, which is a heavily black city. Couldn't do it. And it made him actually say something, which was very controversial, but I get where he's going with it. He said there was an advantage to segregation. At least there had to be black owned businesses because you couldn't go to white ones. So there had to be a black shoemaker. There had to be a black diner. There had to be a black lawyer because you couldn't go to white ones.
Right.
So, but that was his point. No ownership, right? And then that piece, and then no generational wealth. So here's my answer to deal with both of those things without having to punish people today, because the proximity is so far. The vast majority of Americans alive today never own slaves, don't have family members who own slaves. The vast majority don't. I mean, maybe 2% of Americans could somehow link themselves back to a slave owner. And I'm probably being, that's probably too high. Maybe. Yeah. So then how do I do that? Here's how. I have three pieces to this. Piece number one, understanding generational wealth. Anytime a person who's a descendant of slaves, and we use a similar system we use now with Native Americans to figure out if someone's a descendant of slaves, you create a list. These are the people who are considered descendants of slaves. So new people from Nigeria don't get this. Right? It's only descendants of slaves. They get it. If they want to transfer wealth within their family, it is free, regardless of any laws or taxes or fees. In this case, it is free. They get to transfer wealth any way they want for specifically 23 years. I use 23 years because that's a generation. I'm okay to shift that up or down, but there should be a specific time, right? If you want to go hardcore, do 46 years, do 2 generations. I'm fine. We can find the number. The number, I'm okay with moving that number around, but we have a specific number. For the sake of argument, I'm saying 23 years. Again, that's movable.
Right.
So for 23 years, you can shift wealth any way you want for free. If there's a local law, I'd make this an amendment. It breaks the local law. Too bad. No. If you are a descendant of slave, you pay nothing. It is free. That's number one.
And that's a critical thing when we talk about understanding generational wealth, because right now there are penalties for that you, and I don't want to say penalties that like hurt you, but that you pay a cost if you want to transfer wealth from one generation to another. And for the people who don't have a lot of generational wealth, it takes everything. For the people who have billions, well, that $1 million penalty isn't going to hurt them very much. So this allows people who haven't been able to build generational wealth in the past to at least build some.
Correct. And also something else. The Black community starts hearing about generational wealth, which a lot of people don't even think about. It's like not a thing. I want my people to think about that. This is a thing you should be considering and thinking about. That's the second piece. That's piece one. Piece two, getting that wealth. How do you get that wealth? Now, most people would say, well, you're going to give them a check, Larry. And I'm going to say, no, I'm not a fan of writing checks as reparations. And people say, Larry, why not? Here's the reason why. The lottery. The lottery shows me that when people who win the lottery, after 5 years, over 50% are worse off than they were, and about a third go bankrupt.
Right.
Why in the world would I want to destroy my people? Why would I do that? Why in the world would I want to destroy my people by giving them all a bunch of use checks? Dave Chappelle did a show on this.
Oh my God, one of my favorite episodes. I was just going to mention it. I recommend everybody look it up. Find the Chappelle reparations sketch. You can look it up. It's a fantastic piece.
He knows what I'm talking about. I know it too, right? It's a bad idea. But then the answer in response to it, well, Larry, don't give them a lump sum. Instead, give them payments, right? How about over here 23 years, everyone gets X dollars per month, whatever, that kind of thing. I get that completely. And here's why I'm against that. You see it right now already. All the people getting structured settlements, who steps in? Bankers do. Oh, get your cash now. We'll give you one lump sum. Get your money now. And that's already happening now. So what winds up happening? At least half of my people decide to do that, get their money up front, and ruin themselves again. I don't want to do that. So I don't even want the idea of having the structured settlement. I'm not a fan of that. So I don't want that either. So how? Here's what I think we do. Any property purchased and then owned and purchased, or owned or purchased by 51% descendants of slaves gets half property tax for 23 years. Now, why would that matter? I mean, commercial, private, residential, I don't care if it's, rental income, whatever it is, any property purchased, half property tax. Again, this has to be it has to be like an amendment because it's got to go through anything, right? It's got to be like, doesn't matter. Half, period. Now, why does that matter? No, I didn't say bought by a descendant of slaves. 51% or more owned, which means now, say I'm a white guy, I'm an Asian guy, I'm a whatever I am, and I want to buy a big building. It's the first thing I start thinking of. Where are my black friends? It's the first thing I start thinking. Where are my black friends? Because I want them on board here. So what am I doing now? I am encouraging integration without demanding integration. I am encouraging people to work together without demanding it. Not just that, you're going to find a lot of black people who are going to come in who didn't know how this system worked, who didn't get it. Now I'm training them by default. They're training themselves. They're training themselves by default, how this works. You add the generational piece and now the property aspect, and now we're changing how the black community thinks. Now, many black people do think this way already.
Right.
Isn't like a lot don't, but those who are in trouble often don't. So those who are not in trouble, they get to have an advantage. Those who are in trouble get to step up. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. And they'll step up again voluntarily. Look, if you own your property and you don't care, then don't get your black friends involved. That's fine. Don't do that. No worries. You're not required to, but it's half.
Well, and so
now, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there are examples of that exact model working. So I believe media companies, if it's either a woman or minority, 51% owned, there is a tax break. And so you saw that happening. So we know that this is a model that is successful.
Correct. Absolutely. And it brought so many women into the workforce and into entrepreneurship because what women found in the 80s and 90s is the glass ceiling was stopping them.
Right.
So they began instead to go off and build their own. And now you have a situation in today's world where there are a lot of investors who won't invest in the company if there's not at least a woman in the C-suite, if not the top.
Right.
That's where we are now. That's been the swap. And that's been voluntary. So I'm totally fine with that. But it's the second piece. Business. Any business entity started, if it's 51% or more owned by descendant of slaves, half business tax for 23 years. Same thing. So I got a time limit and I got a massive change and an incentive for descendants of slaves to start gaining stuff, gaining property, gaining businesses, gaining intellectual property, gaining things, and then an incentive to transfer that wealth for free in 23 years. Now, there are two arguments I get from this often. Well, I'm sorry, there's a third piece of this, and that is immediately end the war on drugs. And anyone who has been, to include black people, but this is for anyone who has any type of non-violent, and I mean selling or possession charges, are all wiped, immediately expunged. Now, if you shot somebody, or that's different. But if you were just selling or possession, all of them gone. Now, that will also help white people, Hispanic people. That'll help everybody. But by percentage, it'll help black people more.
Yep.
So now, all of a sudden, you're no longer a felon for anything you do that's nonviolent. You got a chance now to get out there. People are going to be literally knocking down your door going, hey, can you help me buy this property? Hey, can you help me start this business? Oh, by the way, generational wealth is a thing. And now that can happen. And now you get an actual second chance. That's what begins to happen. Now, I get a couple people who push back. The first pushback I often get is, well, Larry, that's going to lower our tax base, so everybody has to pay more taxes. I disagree completely. And why do I disagree? For two reasons. One, the black population is less than 13% of the population anyway. Plus, it's just property tax and business tax anyway. Right. So actual percentage will be low compared to everything else. Plus, this should, if it's done right, and I think we can see it from previous, this should spur economic activity. Buying, selling, changing, shifting, all those types of things. In fact, even foreign companies might start doing that too to get some extra tax breaks in America. So it should start a massive shift and change and rotation. So that economic should pretty much even it out. So I think that's step one.
I think that one is a critical thing because there's a John Kennedy, right? Mr. Democrat said at one point in time that the easiest way to get things spurred in a certain community is to lower their taxes and that the economic gain will be more. His phrase, rising tide lifts all boats. You make it possible, it works out for everybody else. You're not talking about a loss of revenue when this happens. Absolutely true.
And so that's the first thing I get. I get that fight pushback often. But also it's like, well, Larry, what after 23 years? Where's the best part? Do you think all those people are going to want to raise their taxes again? Of course not. Of course not. Right. So they're going to fight to retain the same tax level for everybody.
Yep.
And guess what? It's going to work. And when it works and we all get a tax break, what is America going to say? Thank you, black people, which is what I want you to say. So all of a sudden you go, thank you, black people. You gave us all a tax break. That's amazing. After 23 years, it changes that. But more importantly, it begins to change the mindset that you were talking about. It changes the mindset. It makes people think, oh, I should think more like an entrepreneur. That's how my parents got out of poverty in the South Bronx. That's how many immigrant communities get out of their bad situations. It's because of the entrepreneurial spirit. We create that spirit of ownership and entrepreneurship and ownership to move people to the next level that stays in the culture. It will then begin to break the culture, shift the culture, and we'll integrate on our own voluntarily. The last piece I'll bring up, if I could.
Yeah, please.
And I'll wrap up with this last piece. Is that what I want to do is have an actual solution, not just something that feels good. This is a solution. People say, but Larry, what about people who are older? What are they? Well, this gives you an incentive if you're younger to transfer your wealth to your grandma right away. Right. Transfer your wealth to grandma, grandpa right away. I can't fix the issue of the generations we've already lost. I can't change that. And some of the people who are older, I can't change that. What can I do? Make things better from now and in the future. Right. That I can do. I want this to be a thing where we can say, we've done it, reparations are paid, we are better off, let's move on together.
So you laid out a tremendous case that there is indeed systemic racism. You've proposed a solution that doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't take money away from anybody. It merely gives people an incentive to start businesses that will generate more money. It allows people to accumulate generational wealth at, okay, maybe we could say that's at the expense of the government and the estate tax, but honestly, if there's anybody who's out there actually defending the estate tax, you're not going to like anything else in this plan either.
That's true. Yes.
So it makes complete sense. So what is there?
And it doesn't blame anybody.
Exactly.
It doesn't blame anybody because the people today didn't do the bad stuff of 100 years ago.
Right. But it does actually acknowledge that bad things happen. And that's an important thing. Some people are so set in their mind, they're like, I don't want to even acknowledge that this bad thing happened. I'm going to pretend like it's not an issue, but it was. And anybody who's looking at it honestly would see this. So I love this plan. I want to know, what is the activism path? What's the call to action here? How do we get people to know more about it? Is the first thing to do to get more people to sign up at the Sharpe Way, find out more about the stuff that you're talking about?
I love that idea. Well, I love that idea.
Because I actually think that's the right thing for people to do, is that they should be seeing the stuff that you're putting out on these issues because it's on point, and sharing it widely. Because right now, that's the first step. We want more calls to action, but the first call to action is education.
100%. And what I'm trying to show is you can assign or take responsibility without assigning or taking blame. That's the critical things. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming some white guy today for slavery. You didn't own any slaves. You didn't do anything. I'm not blaming you for that at all. I'm just saying, let's acknowledge it. Let's have some empathy and let's find an answer. That's all I'm saying. And if you can be like, you know what, Larry, you're right. That was pretty crappy what happened. I'm with you. Let's find an answer. I think we can win. So what do I want people to do? I want people to stop blaming and to just start having empathy. How do you do that? Number one piece, watch my show Sharpe Way.
Yeah.
Number one.
I can't argue with that. I think that it's a really important thing for people to be doing, because everybody should be consuming from we live in this amazing time where there is a broad and deep sea of content. People should be drinking deeply out of there. I guess drinking out of the sea isn't a good analogy. Deep lake of content. People should be drinking deeply out of it. See all the content that's out there. And I can tell you, as a guy who follows Larry regularly, he's talking about stuff that isn't normally talked about, laying things out like this, right? I mean, this was such a cognizant argument, so well laid out in order, that it's not the sort of conversation that people have heard before about reparations. So please subscribe to Larry's channel. Go to the sharpeway.com, not the Sharpe Way, sharpeway.com, scrolling across the bottom. Find out more about the stuff that Larry's putting out, and then share this, because this reparations idea is one of the best one that's out there. It should appeal to people in the liberty movement because it ends up with lower taxes for everybody. So, I mean, how is this not a win-win scenario? It is. So that's awesome. Larry,
thank you, my
I
friend.
need to do the thing that I was going to ask you to do, which was promote yourself, but it just kind of came upon me at that point in time.
So good.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here for our Juneteenth broadcast. I hope that you're doing something awesome to celebrate, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, my friend.